The Hail Varsity Radio Saturday morning show. Strap yourselves in. Here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt.
Y'all don't even know he was a virgin until he's 28, and now, roll tide.
And Mark Kraynak.
Time has come for someone to put his foot down. And that foot is me.
Welcome to it. It's the weekend edition. It's Hail Varsity. We're presented by Currency. Chris Schmidt, Mark Kraynak, Elijah Herbel. I've had a adventurous ordeal already this morning trying to get up and going technology-wise. I'm a lot like Husker Nation, waiting for that breakthrough. I'm still waiting on the computer to reboot. So we're just messing around on my phone. Kraynak and Elijah, you both look very happy and healthy in your respective studios. Good morning, good sirs.
Well, whatever you said, I feel like much of Husker Nation, I thought you were going to go generally too old and technically not savvy. That's why I thought you were going with that, but alas, it's okay.
And it's not the case with Chris.
And we did that. We did look into this before we started. This was not a Schmitty issue with the technology.
And we talked about it a little bit before we got on here. Like, for whatever reason, disproportionately, technology attacks you. Right, you're sort of like the guy that
it's operator error, man.
It's almost like in baseball, you're a guy that has great contact percentage, but your on base percentage sucks. It's not your fault. You know what I mean? Like you're doing all the right things, but it's just not working out. And that's kind of been like that with you for 20 years, I think. Like
probably.
Imagine how much of a mess Ireland would have been, Mark, if you didn't go. Because you brought your good technology juju to the party. Schmidt brought his bad technology juju. And it just was a level playing field. It was nice and even. We were good up until we had some connectivity issues with the post-game show. So there was good. There was bad. It was what you expected from an Ireland trip. I don't like if it was just Schmidt there, with his luck, it would have been an absolute disaster.
No, I did a little troubleshooting there. Here's, not that we want to go all psychobabble this morning, because if we start to do psychological profiles on all of us, this thing could get dark and weird in a hurry. But one quirk that I think is pretty funny about Schmidt's technological issues, it really is endearing. Chris has like the equivalent of road rage at the technology, right?
That's a good call.
It doesn't actually yield results, but I think it makes him feel better inside when he can just scream at cords and connections, connectivity, all those things. I mean, he gets pissed. You get really pissed at that stuff, and like, good on you, man. Because if that's the worst you do, right? At least you don't actually road rage. So if you're going to go off on something, go off on an inanimate, piece of plastic from China. That's fine.
That's a good take. I mean, that is super accurate. Road rage towards inanimate objects from China.
You don't actually punch them or anything, but you're close, because you know that if you punch them, that's not going to get you anywhere.
But it's not going to work anyway for me, so might as well.
But you let them hear about it. You let those cables hear about it, though.
Yeah.
I love everyone tuning in, just finding out if they didn't know already. It was a pretty slow week in Husker news based on how we started the show here. We're just talking about technology woes for the first.
The reboot has worked, so I'm going to switch devices.
Oh, this is going to be fun. It's not going to work out, right?
Well,
it's not going to work out for you.
Let's see if it
nor is
does.
it going to work out. Nor is it going to work out for our listeners.
Let's see here.
It's not happening. It's not
Mark,
happening.
what did we decide last week? There's always fun on the Hail Varsity audio on the weekend show. Is that what we decided?
Yeah, that's a mouthful.
It's just Hail Varsity. It's weekend edition.
I mean, that's good. Hail Varsity weekend edition. That's pretty good. Mm-hmm. It nods to the magazine. I would like to hear from the viewers on YouTube. We get a handful of viewers every weekend, and they chime in on all kinds of things. I would like to see them help us name this program, right? It was forever Hail Varsity Radio Show, but it's no longer on the radio. So I think right then and there, we're lying to people. We can't call it that. Can't really call it the podcast either, because it's live. Most people hear the word podcast and they think recorded. It is also recorded, but it's live and recorded. So when Chris says weekend edition, I think that's pretty all encompassing, and it's sort of like, maybe that's what we go with. Maybe that's it.
It does make sense. And we had a comment in on our YouTube feed last week agreeing with you that whatever convoluted name you had would work. The Hail Varsity Radio, whatever it was, audio on the weekend. Hail Varsity audio show on the weekend. It's official. That was from Charles last week. So
Hail Varsity audio show on the weekend.
Yeah.
That's really long. That's really long. I don't know if I'm going to get down with that.
Got me okay?
Yeah, we got you good. Nice to see you steady instead of that Blair Witch crap that was going on your phone. This is good.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like you got a laptop. We like it. We like it.
Guys, let's talk a little bit about recruiting and in-state. What's your feel?
Oh no! Oh, here we go again.
Yeah. Now let's just wait.
This
for those of you just listening, this is Chris Frozen. Okay, now he's back. What is our feel on what?
Feel and take on just the job Nebraska's done in-state.
I leaving a little something to be desired, to be honest. But I'm not sure it's a thing you can pin on Matt Rhule just yet. Right. Nebraska is in a bit of a renaissance. I'm talking about the state of Nebraska is in a bit of a renaissance when it comes to talent and Division I ability. For whatever reason, Nebraska's had a disproportionate amount of tight ends, those kind of tweener receiver types that are just big, athletic dudes. Bellevue West has had a handful of them. Now you got Carter Nelson. You had Carney. You've had a handful of those guys, and Carney's already transferred out. Nelson looks like he's going to take a visit to Georgia. He's one of the nation's top recruits. Those Bellevue West guys each went somewhere else. And that goes back to the Frost era. But it probably comes down to Nebraska proving that they're not an S show, right? It basically comes down to prove that you are not a crap show. Doesn't mean you have to win national titles, but have a winning record, get to bowls, be competitive, don't have rumors of coaches drinking too much and being late or whatever. Have a competent, steady program with a good identity. I think you'll start to get more looks from the in-state guys. Right now, if you're an in-state guy, it's not hard to do this math. They have not seen Nebraska have any success, right, in their formative years. When they were growing up, they might have seen Pelini, pull off a couple 9-win seasons, but that's about it. And they were 7 or 8, right? So that's what Nebraska's facing right now. Is they're not considered. I don't think they're credible overall in all of these in-state guys' eyes quite yet.
And I feel like yesterday, and this comes from our conversation yesterday with Brady, Chris, where it almost feels to me with some time to look back on it, I feel like Nebraska under Matt Rhule may have made their first in-state recruiting misstep with Rezac. The fact that Nebraska swooped in so late, you're not in a position where this program is at right now to afford to not go after any of your in-state kids. You can't afford to be choosy right now with just what the history of the past 10 years of Nebraska's in-state recruiting has looked like. You can even go back further than that, 15 years of what Nebraska's in-state recruiting has looked like. As Mark said, you're in a recruiting renaissance, a golden era of Nebraska high school football recruiting right now. Why is Nebraska swooping in late on a kid like Rezac? I don't think you're in a place where you can afford to be choosy. I don't care if, you're behind the 8 ball. He loves Notre Dame. He's probably going to go there. I don't understand why you swoop in with a late offer and stay away from that for so long. For all I care, throw him an offer 6 months ago and don't talk to the kid again. If he's interested, he's interested. If he's not, he's not. But their recruitment felt weird, and it felt like a misstep on the part of Matt Rhule and his staff.
Now, for those that don't know, Chris, just a quick reset for folks that don't know.
Teddy Rezac is a super stater, an all-world football player for Omaha Westside. Westside's been your perennial juggernaut Omaha Metro team. Them and Bell West have been phenomenal. And the Rezac family, a lot of ties to Nebraska over the years as well. So Rezac committed to Notre Dame. Was it yesterday?
Yep.
So, and that was a day after Nebraska sent their offer. Notre Dame officially offered beginning of the week. And then Boston College was the first Power 5 to offer him. So the reason I wanted to open the can of worms about in-state, Mark, you nailed it perfectly. There's a good portion of the in-state population, whether that's rural or metro, if they're going to be a senior or they're going to be a freshman at Nebraska. And Elijah and I went through this. 10 of the last 18 years, they can chalk up to winning seasons for Nebraska football. They have seen 8 losing seasons.
And a lot of them recently.
Yes. So
Yeah.
Nebraska is not the darling in state to their own kids. They'll go, they know about it. Maybe they go with grandma and grandpa, or maybe they go with family, but there's not the romance anymore because it's been a turnstile of coaches. And here's the other part. Like, if you're Coach Rhule, God, you can't take everybody. You can't take everybody in state, and you really can't take everybody in state in this this golden era, as you aptly put it. You've got more in-state kids the last 5 years and the next 3 to 4 years than you probably had since the late 80s, early 90s, when you had that explosion of Division I basketball and football. And I'm talking the Tony Veland class, or the Calvin Joneses, or we go through some of the names, right? So you're in a catch-22. If you're Rhule, you gotta offer them, you gotta take them, and you hope that you're not misstepping. Because let's talk about in-state kids who've performed. You've had the Giffords that have been in-state kids that have performed. Okay. You've had a handful of guys, and some of them have been walk-ons, but it's not like every in-state kid is a hit either. And that's not every California kid's a hit. Not every Florida kid's a hit. Not every Texas kid's a hit. So we aren't kidding when we talk about the inexact science, fellas, of recruiting. But from a PR standpoint, he has gone over and above to do the due diligence part with the in-state tour, with talking to high schools, with talking to coaches. So from an evaluation standpoint, was someone asleep at the wheel, or in their evaluation process? And I'm just asking the question, do they like somebody else for 2024?
Well,
an outside linebacker.
Whenever I saw the Rezac offer, I literally had that thought of, oh, Nebraska hadn't offered him yet. What the hell's going on? Like, I had assumed Nebraska just already offered the kid. I know it's my job to know these sorts of things, but whenever you have an Omaha Westside kid, as you said, great talent, all-state guy. There's schools coming in from across the country that want to come recruit him. You expect Nebraska's already got an offer out to him, whether he's interested or not. It was one of those moments where I went, wait, why has there not been an offer to Teddy Rezac yet?
Now his escalated quickly though. His was a little different. I wouldn't put it's not like it was like a Danny Kalen situation where he was getting Division I offers as a sophomore or whatever, freshman. His all came like very recently, in the last couple weeks. Notre Dame jumped on him. So he's sort of a late bloomer in terms of offers, but it is that fine line if you're the coach where it's like, okay, are we being too insular? Are we being too generous with our offers by going after these in-state kids? Because one thing about in-state kids that is maybe different than the Texas and California guys is level of competition that they're facing, to where it's a little bit tougher, probably, if you're in that position, to be like, okay, is this kid really, really good at it? When he's playing in Omaha Benson or Omaha South that just never has success at all, versus playing like in the Dallas Metroplex, where that the level of competition is good, and then those people rise up, right? So that's a difficult proposition, I think, at all times. But it seems like for whatever reason now, you have enough in-state talent that you could round out the majority of your roster with just in-state guys. I mean, just look at what's happening, right? Like, look at the kid from Gretna going to Okie State, right? And that's a prolific offense, and he's going to put up serious numbers.
Kalen at Bell West.
Kalen going to Missouri. So there's 2 high-level Division I quarterbacks right there. bunch of receivers. Bellevue West has, I think, 3. Bellevue West alone has like 3, right? Plus you got Malachi at Lincoln East, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's 4 Division I caliber receivers in different classes. You got Rezac, like you mentioned. You got Carter Nelson. You got on and on and on. I mean, there's probably a good 10, 12 guys that you could add. But to Chris's point, you do face maybe that risk of, are we being too generous with the in-state offers, and are these guys legitimately Division I caliber? And I think Rezac, I think Nebraska thought they could slow play him. I think they thought they didn't have to jump on it right away, and then boom, it escalated quickly with Notre Dame, and here we are.
And that's why I said I think it's been the first recruiting misstep of the Matt Rhule era, because that's the whole advantage of in-state kids. You're seeing them first. You can get eyes on them first. You can get the offer out to them first, and you can get a leg up on the rest of the country.
Brendan Vogel joins us, managing editor, HailVarsity.com and magazine. Get your subscription now. Get the yearbook ordered, HailVarsity.com/offer. Vogues, when we talk about losing out on in-state talent to other programs, it's happened. It's happened with some of the Bellevue West talent going to the Auburns and Oklahomas. There's a kid that played at Burke, and I'm forgetting his name, that played for Lamonji, that ended up at Notre Dame, that's still at Notre Dame. He's had a position switch from wide out to secondary. God, I need to be better, and I'm forgetting his name. But so there's a Notre Dame connection with Westside's coach already. And you also look at some of the in-state departures that have gone west. I know Avante Dickerson's coming back, but the Jackson kid also a departure to Oregon. So let's explore, Vogues, your take on just the Nebraska mystique right now for in-state kids. The exodus has been happening, but it's not just a one staff problem. It's been an ongoing issue, and it's been an ongoing issue because of performance on the field. The love affair is not as strong.
Yeah, I think Mystique is probably the place to start. So you're always going to have a group of in-state guys who just dream of being Huskers. That group might be smaller. It probably almost certainly is smaller than it was 20, 30 years ago, but you'll still have some of those people. But when you look at, if you're a kid from Omaha and all of a sudden Notre Dame's at your school, like whatever you think about Notre Dame, they've been in 2 college football playoffs and they have a mystique. And when you look at, Nebraska, not only the lack of success lately on the field, that's the part that they can control. Other parts they can't control, like TV isn't an advantage at this point. Facilities basically aren't an advantage at this point, though having a new facility will help a little bit. But broadly, everybody's got great facilities. Maybe NIL can be that, but it's just, if you're not the kid that grew up as like, man, if I get the chance to play for Nebraska, I'm saying yes the day they offer. Like there's a lot of things that can lure you away. And I think to Elijah's point about this maybe being the first miss of the Rhule era, I can see that line of thought. I think Elijah is right. Like your advantage in Nebraska recruiting now, where in Oklahoma State, a Notre Dame, a Michigan are here all the time, essentially, is you've got to be the first mover. And it's hard to do that for a guy. It's hard to do that for a guy in the 2024 class. I think we're seeing it a little bit more with guys that are a little bit further down the road because, and honestly, another change is just this era of recruiting. I think the old kind of idea, and, we all talked about this, back in the day, we talk about it now of, well, it is different. A player playing in DFW Metroplex versus playing 8-man football in central Nebraska. But I don't know how many people are worried about that piece of it anymore across the country because you have so much data on these guys. You can look and say, hey, I don't care if this guy plays 6-man football. He kind of looks like an athletic freak. And I think this staff will end up being pretty good at that piece of it.
And is there a silver lining there too in looking at the company that Nebraska's keeping right now on the recruiting front? I'm generalizing here, but it feels like in the last decade, the majority of players that ended up committing here, in a lot of cases, Nebraska was their best offer, right? And it's not. And Nebraska was competing against, say, Tulsa, maybe SMU. Sort of those good second tier, those really good second tier programs. Now you're talking whether it's Raiola with Georgia, whether it's Carter Nelson with Georgia, and Notre Dame is a factor there too. Rezac now with Notre Dame. So if you're now going against Georgia and Notre Dame, you're probably not going to win those right this second. But the fact that Nebraska's in on those dudes, maybe a bit of a silver lining.
Yeah, I think so. Get in the race to start, and eventually, I think if you get some results on the field, and you continue to be, fairly open and honest, it's my impression of how this staff is on the recruiting trail. I think that'll produce those results, and eventually you can win some of those races, and you need to, because otherwise, like, it's always going to be hard based on where the programs have been respectively against, say, a Georgia, to just beat them out. You have a chance to go to the two-time national champions versus Nebraska, which is trying to get there, and it takes a special kind of person to sign up for the latter. But just being in the discussion with that, I think is pretty good, and it's just going to take some time to actually show what Matt Rhule era Nebraska football is going to look like.
And it's an interesting discussion. Is it easier to get kids from Texas, the sell to Texas, the sell to Pennsylvania, the sell to Florida, the sell to California versus the sell to Nebraska kids?
Because they're insulated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that. And the outrage right now with the whole Rezac thing. I mean, Nebraska fans some are ticked because of the family history and just the guy's won titles. He's a hell of a good football player. How does he not fit what Nebraska wants to do? But there's so many out there right now. You're not going to be able to get all of them. If you don't end up getting Rezac, and the alternative is you have another linebacker that comes in and plays 2 years for you, it's gonna be okay. And you hope Teddy has a hell of a great career at Notre Dame. I mean, sometimes you just gotta go your separate ways. The Kalen situation, no one's freaking out about that, or it's not as loud of an outrage because you've been chasing Dylan.
Yeah.
and that's your own in-state kid that is going to go to Missouri, for God's sake, because he's super talented. So situations matter here, folks.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. If you are a recruit in New Jersey or Pennsylvania or California or Texas, the mystique of Nebraska football, the mystique that they'll tell you about in the brochures and what they send you, it probably hasn't been dulled as much versus, some of those players you just mentioned who theoretically could be listening to us talk about this right now. I think that's the difference.
That's a lot of pressure.
It is.
Saturday.
Yeah. Hopefully they're not awake yet if you're a high schooler on a Saturday. I think that's a real piece of this is you get, Nebraska, you can look at it on a game day Saturday and the appeal is instant and obvious to anyone, no matter where you're from. Difference is that New Jersey prospect doesn't hear constant, all of this stuff, every time. And this is going to happen every time you lose an in-state recruit. It's just kind of a natural reaction of people oh, well, you're here. Why aren't you going here? And it's become a lot tougher to actually pull that off, I think, over the past decade or so. But we'll see. I think Rhule and his staff will hold their own on that front.
This is it's a relatively recent phenomenon too, and I think the losing contributes to it, but also just the proliferation of things like huddle and the camp circuit and everything else, where Nebraska is now. In the past, you could kind of kids were kind of a secret in some ways, right? It's no longer the case anymore. But I mean, you just look at the last 5-ish years. Back in the day, you would have the occasional kid leak out to Notre Dame, like a Ty Good or somebody like that. But now you're talking about Nebraska, primarily metro area talent, dotting the rosters of Oregon, Oklahoma, Auburn, soon to be Notre Dame. Got even North Dakota State in there. It's a different deal now where the Oklahoma State, these kids they're getting seen, they're getting offered, they're seeing new possibilities. And Nebraska's got a little bit of a leakage problem right now. But I don't know. I do have you can't pin it on Rhule and staff yet. I don't think. I haven't even been here a year, right? Haven't even been here a year. I think you got to give it a little bit of time, but it seems like, hey, go ahead and give the benefit of the doubt. Because Brandon, here's the other thing, and you documented this better than anyone on the planet, and that is when you give the benefit of the doubt to an in-state guy versus an out-of-state guy, percentage-wise, really good idea because of retention rate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you've got a bigger development upside. If you're talking percentage points, but it adds up and makes a difference if you're like, hey, maybe we like the high 3-star linebacker in Missouri a little bit more, but we're not sure we're going to get him, and we're just as close on, Johnny Football from in-state.
He's a great
you would
player.
feel better based on the data about having that in-state linebacker for more seasons. The more states you have to jump over to get a guy to Nebraska, the more likely it becomes that, hey, the culture change or whatever it is, basically just homesickness. So that's a big piece of it. And for a program that needs to be developmental, I think we all know that. And for a coaching staff that's talked about being developmental, I think that can become a bigger piece of it going forward. And, it's also kind of an interesting thought experiment to me to wonder, you mentioned huddle and things like that, the access and what we know about players anywhere in the country is so much greater now. Was the talent level at Nebraska always maybe this high and just nobody knew it? And the kind of the storied history of walk-ons, which I'm not trying to diminish it or anything at Nebraska, but were you getting guys who otherwise would have ended up playing for national titles at North Dakota State?
Yeah, look, and you've had a handful of guys go to Iowa and become multi-year starters. You've had a handful of guys go to, you mentioned North Dakota State, where they get drafted like an Easton Stick. It's a great point. Wyoming even has had. It seems like the guys that do leave and go to the, I guess, perceived lesser programs, they contribute heavily.
They play well, and they go play on Sundays.
Hell, Harrison Phillips, multi-year starter and now in the NFL. It's been steadily increasing the amount of guys that leak out. I think now it's gotten to the point of it's a little bit of red alert status where it's okay, the trends are clear now. In-state guys can play, right? They can. They're more likely to stay too. I think the writing's on the wall there.
Well, Brandon, what kind of cloud would that hang over the new staff if you do lose a couple of these top guys in state from the class of 2024? I think it's got to be expected every single year, but you look at the fact that Daniel Kalen, as we mentioned, already off to Mizzou, Rezac's off to Notre Dame, and we had a comment in the StreamYard saying his twin brother is still out there. That would be referring to Anthony Rezac, his brother, who's the quarterback for Westside. But say you lose a guy like Carter Nelson, and you got two great receivers from Bellevue West who the whole world's coming after them, it feels like. If you lose some of these guys, Nelson, Hall, McMorris, what kind of cloud does that hang over the Nebraska program, specifically with Matt Rhule first year and, you're already losing in-state kids?
Yeah, it would be tough to, I think, miss out on all of the high end there. But, so much of the recruiting work is done. Well, it's done before Matt Rhule and company started for guys in this upcoming class. So that's something you got to overcome. But I don't think I don't think the cloud would be such that it's nothing a couple of wins in the fall could fix. Like if they were to say maybe get one or two of that top group of the 6 or 7, I mean, even that might sound ambitious now that I'm saying it out loud. But if you go 8-4 and everybody comes away feeling pretty good about Matt Rhule's first season, I think it'll help you with future in-state classes. But that'll be the focus for fans at that point. So yeah, it's there. It's a real thing, but I don't think it's anything they can't overcome.
Stephen chimes in. I think it's got to be considered. What has to be considered here is the player's position, how many athletes can be offered, and that's do you have a spot for the player? Do you have a plan? Do you have an idea where someone can play? Notre Dame clearly likes Teddy at outside linebacker, and he's a fit for their system there. But there's a lot of moving around, right? There's a lot of moving around,
and that's
position-wise within the Rhule setup.
And that's what I led off with to start is like the player's position. On one hand, yeah, it's important, but also where Nebraska's been, you're not in a place where you can afford to be choosy with your in-state kids. And if you miss on an in-state kid, I think it hurts less than if you miss on an out-of-state kid. But you can't go and be choosy with these guys and then, they're going and dominating everyone with Notre Dame. If you make that mistake, it's not unforgivable, but people are going to remember stuff like that. I don't think you can afford to be choosy just based on where the program's been with the in-state kids. If it's a different conversation, if you're coming off back-to-back 10-2 seasons and you decide not to offer an in-state kid, completely different conversation. But with where Nebraska's been, I don't think you can afford to be doing that right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're talking about, the question about Teddy Rezac, the quarterback, like Chris mentioned. I think that's a case in point. So, he's athletic. He's identical twin to the guy that was just offered and accepted Notre Dame. So, he's athletic enough, but he's been playing quarterback primarily. And that's probably not his future. He's a good enough quarterback. And so he's going to go on the circuit and he's going to, I believe he's going to be working out for Coach Rhule and attending a camp there. And so teams are waiting to see him throw and all that. I'm not an expert at it, but I don't see his future as a high-level Division I quarterback. I do see him as worthy of a Division I roster spot somewhere, though. Probably in the secondary, at linebacker, or one of those hybrid rover types.
Yeah, to the comment about like how many athletes can you take, I think that's a real question. My sense with this staff is they may be less afraid of that notion than maybe some others throughout the country. I mean, Rhule has talked extensively about their history of kind of taking guys who they like the measurables on, and they'll find a way to find the best fit for them on the football field. The tough thing with Rezac for me is I kind of look at him, and I think he wants to progress to a point where he can be maybe more of a classic linebacker. But right now, like, he's kind of an Isaac Gifford type, and oh, by the way, Isaac Gifford has played in every game he's been at Nebraska for. Yeah. And I think he's going to have a pretty good season in this Tony White system. Someone like Rezac really fits that in my mind with his versatility that he can offer you. And, versatility kind of out of the box right when he gets there. But if you want to get him to a point where you're like, oh, you're one of our 3 linebackers, like I think he'll get there.
Brendan Vogel's with us, weekend edition, Hail Varsity at Brandon L. Vogel. Been pretty fascinating discussion on in-state, out-of-state, and then just the in-state numbers this cycle and next cycle and years to come, and even the past couple of years. And yeah, Rezac sure as hell seems like a fit for this unpredictable defense. Yeah. In a 3-3-5. Folks, before we say goodbye, what are you working on? I know the yearbook's set to drop here in about a month, and you've been elbow deep in team previews.
Yeah, I'm about to finish off the West Division, and then I got to put that aside for a little bit because we've got the May issue coming out next week. So kind of been working on those 2 things concurrently. We're going to have what I think is pretty cool. It's the end of the academic year for Nebraska and everybody else, not January, but we're going to do a year in photos that I think kind of looks back at key turning points for this past year in most of Nebraska's sports through the lens of our photographers. So that'll be pretty fun. we'll get that May issue out and on people's doorstep, and then fully transition to the yearbook. So a couple members of our staff did have the chance to sit down with Matt Rhule for about 45 minutes this week. So tease that'll be coming in the yearbook. I'll have a pretty extensive Q&A with the head coach.
Hey, quick little, as you've been doing those West previews, the one team that, as you've dug deep, has surprised you with either extreme, surprised you as being like, oh, damn, they could be a player, or, oh, it's going to be rough. Anybody stand out?
Yeah, it's a tough year to project in the Big Ten, and I kind of resist the notion that Wisconsin's kind of the favorite by default. Luke Fickell's in a really good spot. They return a ton on offense, a little bit less so on defense. Like the Badgers are going to be, I think, a deserving favorite. Surprising on the other end, it's kind of shocking to sit back and realize that if not for a certain game in Ireland, Wisconsin or Northwestern would be on a 15-game conference losing streak. They've won one conference game in 3 of the past 4 seasons. Like,
wow,
there might be some real danger signs at Northwestern, which gets tricky when you've got a coach like Pat Fitzgerald, who not only won the most games but has the highest winning percentage in program history.
Did COVID affect them disproportionately? Like the more liberal, high academic schools like Stanford, I know it decimated them. Did Northwestern? Could you chalk some of it up to that, of just sort of like a couple lost years with not being able to practice as much and recruiting restrictions and things like that? I'm just curious.
It could be. I hadn't thought about that. I'll actually go and look at that through that lens. Now I'm intrigued. I mean, 2020 was the last kind of good year that they had, but you're talking about, you don't feel the effects of it until a little bit later. I mean, I look at it and I think the big thing is like it's hard for a school like Northwestern or Stanford to be a real player in the transfer portal, and that becomes like you've got to be. And they did just add a quarterback, Cincinnati's starter, who was also a starter at Eastern Michigan, who was at Cincinnati before that, which should help at least give that offense a little something to hang its hat on. But you just, if you can't look to the portal to address your needs, like almost everybody else in the country, at least every other Power 5 school, certainly, boy, you've got to be really, really right in your evaluation and cut ties with their defensive coordinator, bringing in a defensive coordinator from North Dakota State. So that'll be interesting for Northwestern.
That's another thing. I forget his name now, but the defensive coordinator that retired,
Hankowitz.
Hankowitz was a witch, right? Like he was, man. Their defenses were so solid under him for forever. He retires. That's also coincided with their slide.
Yep. Yeah, it's a pretty big breaking point. Retired after 2020. Got a Big Ten championship game.
Brandon, before we get you out of here, I also want to get some more insight on this year in photos. That sounds like a really interesting idea. Great way to showcase. I mean, great photography from Hail Varsity all year long, and I'm really looking forward to that. But did you happen to include a picture of Schmidt crying following the onside kick in Northwestern? Was that or I guess in Dublin against Northwestern? Was that included? Did you get that?
There was no crying. There was no crying. It was more, as Kraynak painted the picture, more of a road rage moment.
Eric, our photographer, was focused on the game there. I wasn't seated too far away from Schmidt, so I guess it would have been on me to get an iPhone photo of that moment. And I missed that. So that's not going to be in there, though. Ireland is one of the turning points, we identified. We want to do kind of a year in photos, but we don't want to just run the best photos we have necessarily, because a lot of those have already appeared in the magazine. So we kind of took this, hey, what were those moments where seasons turned, and started from that perspective and went back to see what we have. So the Ireland game is very much included.
I mean, that not only was a year a season turned, that felt like a year that a Husker football program turned. The mood going into Dublin and the mood following Dublin, I feel like, was a stark change in Husker Nation. I think changed the direction of a program. I mean, if you don't have Dublin, who knows where Husker football is at right now? Like, it's hard to play that game, but
there's moments of press box, what the hell? Me and Vogues over the years. I mean, it's so so good where there's the side eye and the look at one another after that moment as we're perched where we're perched in Dublin, or, this isn't going too badly. Halftime of Boulder, kiss of death, blow a 20-point lead. They're pretty close. Things are okay, Norman. I mean, Vogues, we just need to not talk to one another at halftime, good, bad, or ugly.
Could be. Have no impressions. Just be like, we are just watching events unfold on the field. Let's see how the rest of it unfold.
Mm-hmm. Appreciate you, Vogues. You have a good weekend, okay? Thanks for the time.
You too. See you guys.
All right. Brandon Vogel with us from HailVarsity.com and magazine, the managing editor. Get the subscription, digital print yearbook, HailVarsity.com/offer. The Iron Horse is upon us in that hostage room. Gary Sharp with us.
Wow.
Sharpie, what's up? No hat this morning?
No, I just got done working out. It's a beautiful day outside.
He's captured.
I'm not in a hostage room. That's my living room behind me. I just have the shades pulled.
Gotcha.
What's the workout? What's your routine? Let's talk about that. Let's have fitness hour here.
I went Peloton today.
Nice.
Oh,
yeah.
People are addicted to that.
Well, I'm a newbie to Peloton. I know a couple of people that have really, really enjoyed that workout. And so I said, I'll try it. And so it's okay. Like biking is not for me. I think I get bored. But it does. I mean, it makes it interesting. I will say that. And I'll tell you tomorrow. I'll tell you tomorrow morning if I can get out of bed.
I fully recommend what I've been on the past couple months. Rucksack, go for a walk, add some weight to your walk.
Yes.
Looks like a charm.
What I'm doing.
Wait a minute. So Elijah, if I saw you out on a trail in Lincoln, you'd have like the leg weights on and you'd be having like the little weights in your hands going up and down.
No,
like I used to do back in the 90s.
Big backpack. It's just a big backpack with a flat weight plate in it. So I think I got 45 pounds in there. So you'll see me like struggling up a hill on a trail.
Oh, nice.
That's where it's at.
The backpack. I mean,
that's a wise move.
Elevates your heart rate.
Mm-hmm.
It's an effective workout. Newsflash: Gary Sharp is rich too, because Peloton, you're not getting that for like $100, man. I mean, Gary is dropping some serious coin over here. Gary's rich. Gary is gonna probably if you could send us all some money, maybe listeners, we could do a contest. You could give listeners some of your wealth.
Gary's Peloton.
So hold on here. It's not as expensive as it used to be. Like when COVID was going on and everybody was indoors and you were looking for things to work out. Remember Peloton blew up. Like the stock went through the roof. Everybody was getting a Peloton. They've kind of taken a hit in the last year.
They have.
Their PR has not been good.
They've run out their C-suite and all that. Yeah, it's been a whole thing. Yeah.
Welcome to business hour.
Right. Yeah, I know. That's good stuff.
Well, speaking of
Gary,
real quick, should we get to business? And you got a quick point.
Let me get some coffee. I'm listening.
Elijah, so you were mentioning Dublin. Did you guys know, because two of you guys were actually in Dublin, you know when you went into the airport and they had it all decked out in Nebraska and Northwestern stuff? That's still up at the Dublin airport. They haven't taken it down.
Didn't know that.
A mutual friend of ours just got back from Dublin, and he said when they flew in there, they got off the plane and they were like, whoa, the Nebraska helmet is everywhere in the airport.
That's Nebraska going international. That's recruiting right there, Gary.
Well, and so I said, when you went around Dublin and you said you were from Nebraska, did anybody go, about that onside kick?
Thankfully, they don't know what that means. And they were just there for the spectacle.
I think it was one of those things that in Dublin you'd know. Why were all these people dressed in red in our pub after the game swearing about a onside kick?
Why were they saying leave him there? Who are they talking about?
Steven in the stream. It's not even a question. It's just a comment that, I think he's basically just throwing up some soft toss here, and it's up to us to swing and hit it. He just writes, JoJo Doman throwing Frost and staff under the bus. That did happen on a radio show this week.
A little bit of a dramatic description. I don't think he's throwing them under the bus.
I
listened to the comment. I didn't think it was as serious as some people are making it out to be.
He called out the authenticity of the words from the coach. The hell does he mean there, Gary?
Okay, so I talked about this the following day, and JoJo was very vague. And this isn't new. JoJo, a couple of years ago, was on a podcast, and he basically said everything that we already know. Lack of authenticity, not really interested in building relationship with players. So none of that is new. But I wonder, every time that Matt Rhule does something or gets in front of a room, I think we get further away from Scott. And that's a good thing, because it's going to, the last 5 years in our business is going to change how we cover Matt Rhule. And it will. I mean, we learned some lessons about how we covered Scott Frost. And I think we're covering Matt Rhule a little bit differently, but Matt Rhule is completely different. There has to be a market when there is no more fascination with Scott Frost, right? Whether it be Nebraska football starts winning, or again, every time the current head coach speaks, and he's got a strategy about a foundation and a process, and he comes across as a guy that gets it. I continue to say this, and it amazes me what he has done in now 6+ months of relationship building with former players, former coaches, getting out in the state, taking pictures, meeting people. If I would have laid that all out for you and said, tell me who the head coach is, you would have said Scott Frost. It's Matt Rhule. Enough said. So, JoJo was very vague. And, do you still want like details that we all kind of know, we've alluded to, we've said, or we don't know, or is everybody just ready to move on?
Yeah, I think so, Gary. And, a lot of this too has to do with Rhule's personality. And again, whether or not this works is a whole nother story. I'm not saying it's going to work, but I do like him from the fit standpoint of he is a natural salesman, right? Like that's not him being fake. He's just a natural salesman. Yeah. He's good on stage and in public settings because his dad was is a preacher, and you can see why. And then you couple that with the fact, and this was another Frost bugaboo. I think he had it coming here. I think Frost had good loyalty coming here, but I think it fell apart. But Rhule, his staff, everybody around him reveres him, looks up to him, owes their success to him, maybe with the exception of Tony White, right? Like just everybody else is all about some Matt Rhule, and they trust his word, they believe in his word, and they are echoing and parroting exactly what he says. And that both of those things, Frost in the community wasn't quite there, right? Frost is like that salesman wasn't quite there. And then Frost having the absolute devotion and loyalty of his staff wasn't quite there either. Yeah. Rhule seems to have all those things in spades.
Well, he's a veteran coach. Mm-hmm. I mean, would Scott be different at Nebraska if he had gone Central Florida, another Power 5 stop, and then finished at Nebraska? Because he would have had that in-between experience instead of 2 years as a head coach. Matt Rhule is a professional head coach. And I think if you and we all know what the attention is like towards Nebraska football here, and the expectations, which are not out of whack, like they probably were, 5-10 years ago. I think you need a guy that has an idea of how to build the infrastructure before you start building on the field, and a professional head coach. And I think that's what Nebraska got. And I think that's where Trev gets credit for knowing what the program lacked and finding a guy that the program needed. And you're right. If this, we don't know if this is going to relate to the field, but it does have the feeling that if this pops, there's enough of a foundation in place that you can continue to build on it and have success, not just fleeting success, but you can get the ball rolling once again. And that's why I'm very, very encouraged to see this year when they go through the ups and downs, how he handles that. When he handles the adversity of, hey, you lose a football game at Nebraska. Oh boy, here we go again. But he always answers the why. That's what, if I had a piece of advice for Scott, is Scott would say things, and I think Scott's a good football coach. I just don't think he's a head coach. And he would say things, but there was never okay, this is why I'm doing it. If you listen to Matt Rhule, he'll say things and then he'll follow it up with a why. And I think in today's society, that's pretty important.
Chris, you're on mute or something, man.
Sorry about that. Okay, better now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Had to get the dogs out.
Please.
It's been one of those mornings technologically. Sharpie, let's dive in. We were talking with Vogues about this. Want to get your perspective because you're really close to it with your high school coverage in the Metro, and just the reaction in your backyard with Rezac and Notre Dame.
Well, I don't get Nebraska's offer. I just think that was I don't understand why Nebraska offered him. If they were looking for optics, that was not good, because I know the Rezacs, and Teddy is, people getting confused with his brother Anthony, who is the quarterback. And Anthony is the one that has probably gotten the most attention. And then of late, Teddy has come on. But Teddy's a heck of an athlete. Teddy is an outside linebacker at the Power 5 level. But he's also one of those guys that maybe at times isn't great to judge off of film. You got to go watch him in person, and you'll see that he is a player. So when he got that offer, which really surprised the family. Now, they are very much a dedicated, loyal family, going through the process with both of their twins. But when Notre Dame came on board, and Al Golden last week, he made the offer. They asked, is this committable? And they were told, Coach Freeman said, yes, we want you. And at that point, guys, on Saturday, I had a pretty good impression that it was over, that Teddy was going to commit to Notre Dame. And it got, as they kind of figured it out, was I surprised Nebraska offered? No, but it looked like one of those offers of, hey, Boston College, Missouri, and now Notre Dame has offered a kid in our backyard. We've got to offer him. And they offered him. I don't know if they knew that he was going to commit to Notre Dame or he was a strong lean at the point. I didn't like the Nebraska offer, but I like Teddy Rezac, and I think he's a good pickup for Notre Dame. And, Notre Dame has come into this state before. They got Xavier Watts, who's going to play a lot this year at Notre Dame. Yeah. They tried to get all those Burt guys. They're hot after Carter Nelson. I mean, the one thing about this is it a Notre Dame versus Nebraska thing, guys, or is it Notre Dame is such a strong brand, not only just the football, but having that on your resume. When you're done and you can put Notre Dame on your resume, whether you play football or not, the connections around this country for being a Notre Dame grad, man, you can't even put a price on that. So not surprised that Teddy went to Notre Dame. Good pickup. I don't think he was ever going to go to Nebraska. So I don't look at it as a loss for Nebraska, but I look at it as why did you offer him? That just didn't make sense.
Well, Gary, you mentioned something that I thought was a pretty interesting point, that the entire Scott Frost tenure at Nebraska has changed how we in Nebraska media do our job, how we cover the team. And do you think that the Scott Frost tenure has changed our reaction to a guy like Teddy Rezac and that weird late Nebraska offer, him going off to Notre Dame? Do you think that the last tenure has impacted how we feel about this recruitment?
Maybe a little bit. You look at, I think of two reactionary offers that come to mind. Remember when Danny Kaelin, and I know, Mark, you would know this really well because I think we talked about it, when he went to camp at Florida State, when he was a freshman, and Florida State offered, Nebraska really had no idea who he was. And all of a sudden, Wackadoosical decided, hey, let's offer him a scholarship. And they were like, okay, he's a quarterback. He's under your direction. Offer him. They really had no idea who he was. That was a reactionary offer. Danny Kaelin's going to Missouri. This was a reactionary offer because they had plenty of time to offer Teddy Rezac. But I'm not going to knock Nebraska for this. They got beat by a program that right now has more cachet than they do. It's who is the focus at the top of your board, from Carter Nelson to Caleb Pye from Omaha Central to Caleb Benning at Westside, or / Isaiah McMorris at Bellevue West.
Hey, Gary, Brandon asked a pretty good rhetorical question. I want to get your take on this. Is, Nebraska's obviously in the state of Nebraska is in this talent renaissance, right? You're getting a lot of high major Division I prospects or Power 5 prospects coming out of the Metro, Lincoln, even some of the smaller communities outside. And he more or less was asking Brandon, has it always been this good, but it's just now that the access, huddle and camp circuit and all that is finally just opening these guys up to all these other programs. Do you see it more like that? Or do you think in recent times, maybe due to training academies that Steve Warren's running or things like that, do you think state of Nebraska's talent level has increased as a result of that? Or has that always been this good?
No, I think that's a great question from the viewer and Mark, your question, because that's now 9 in-state offers. And, Nebraska last year had really good success in the state, and they kind of have. We probably pay too much focus, guys, on guys that got away instead of guys that said yes. that have come to Nebraska and have turned out to be pretty good football players over the last few years. But I get it. That's how it works when you're a state like Nebraska with 1.9 million people and you don't have 40 D1 guys. A guy gets away and you're like, oh my gosh. I think what has happened is twofold. You've got more exposure now. The Warren Academy, 7-on-7. It's basically become a year-round sport in the state of Nebraska without any type of spring football. And then also, there is the part of the players have gotten better because the coaching has gotten better. The evaluation has gotten better. You've got more former college players that are involved from border to border, east, west, north, south, that are involved in high school football. So their connection and telling people about such and such, there's just so much more opportunity for people to know who's playing football in the state of Nebraska, regardless of where you live. I love it. Would I love every guy to go to Nebraska that Nebraska wants? Certainly. But I love that kids are getting attention and they're going to get an opportunity to play at the next level because there is some really, really good talent in this state, and it's only going to get better. And what we're seeing is, I think we're making a transition, and Schmidt, you spent a lot of time, and Elijah, around high school football scene in Lincoln. I think we're transitioning a little bit away from, this is a state that's big-bodied and we have linemen. We got a lot of skill guys. We've got a lot of skill guys that are emerging throughout this state, and that's a sign that, man, we got some things going on in Nebraska when it comes to high school football.
Sharpie, to piggyback on that, not only does Nebraska have skill, talent, they have multi-sport talent, and they have track talent that is up Coach Rhule's alley. I mean, he wants that track athlete, that mentality of what it takes to be a winner on track and field. I mean, and that translates a lot. And I'm all for it. I mean, it's not a case anymore where kids are just specializing in hoops or baseball, which may have been the case there. They are playing multiple sports, and they love doing it.
Well, and that's a great point, Schmidt, because I'll give you, Tristan Alvano is a perfect example.
Yeah.
So he's really set on winning the kicking job in the fall, and he's got a really good shot. And for people that don't recognize the name right away, he's the Omaha Westside kicker that won the state championship game, kicking from, 50 plus yards away in Memorial Stadium when he's already had to deal with the elements. And Tristan's got a great leg. Tristan also is a great soccer player at Westside. But you know what? He's looking ahead to this fall, and he said, you know what will make me stronger is running track. So he made the transition, and he went out for the track team at Westside. He's going to be running along with the plethora of really good athletes, boys and girls, this upcoming week at Omaha Burke. It's kind of that, people are thinking about their future. And so I'm playing multiple sports, but I'm going to play sports that help me down the road. That's why you're seeing more and more linemen in the state that spend their winter wrestling. I love linemen that have wrestled because of everything that sport teaches you about accountability, responsibility, footwork, power with your hands, all of that kind of stuff. Tyson Terry's a prime example in the class of 25 at Omaha North. He's someone that Nebraska is coveting. He's a guy that is a big time wrestler, but also a big time lineman. So they're playing multiple sports, but they're also connecting them how they can help their football career down the road.
Gary Sharp is with us on the Hail Varsity Weekend Edition. I think that's what we're going to go with now, by the way.
What were you preoccupied there by, Mark? You were.
I was looking at baseball stuff.
Okay.
I was looking at baseball stuff. I got multiple monitors over here. All right. I'm a businessman.
Dude, right? I know. Oh, we know.
Yeah. So, okay. And I was just looking into the race to make the field of 8 for the Big Ten tournament. It's going to come down to next weekend. That was one of the things I was looking at and want to handicap it. It looked dicey last week after leaving Maryland, but getting the big win last night against Penn State, certainly helpful. If the season ended today, Nebraska's in, right? And they're in this group of 8, Illinois being looking like maybe they're the odd ones out. They're at Rutgers this weekend. Rutgers is playing really well. They've won 6 in a row. So it doesn't appear like Illinois is likely to gain ground. And then also next weekend, Illinois is not even playing in the conference. So they're not going to be, they're playing like UT Martin or something. So Illinois' chance to make that 8 is this weekend, today and tomorrow, to be in the conversation. As you look at it, Gary, and again, this was dicey. it seems like Nebraska's in, unless they have just a cataclysmic, meltdown here in these last few games. They close the season with Purdue next weekend. They finish out with Penn State this weekend. If you had to handicap it, Nebraska's chances of making the field of 8, Gary?
Really, really good. I mean, hey, the team they played last night, Penn State's had a rough time in the state of Nebraska. They got clubbed by Omaha. They got hammered last night. I think if you can win 2 more, you're in the tournament. Now you just have to figure out, man, how do we avoid Indiana and how do we avoid Maryland? Thing to also keep in mind about this tournament is it is stretched out over another day. They've added another day to the tournament this year. They're starting on Tuesday, but I think Nebraska will find a way to be in. Then we have to talk about, man, are they going to be consistent enough to run off, 3, 4, 5 days of good baseball where they can win a title? Because that's what they need to get in.
Yeah, and this roster, it is such a perplexing group. I mean, you have, like, just to put in historical context, Bryce Matthews and Max Anderson are having lights out years. I mean, these two guys are competing they're both in the running for the Triple Crown on the team. Right? It's crazy. And they have consistently played like that. But as you look at it, there's only 2 other guys hitting above 300. A month and a half ago, there were a handful. It's kind of like the rest of the lineup has been trending down, while those 2 guys have stayed remarkably consistent. On the positive side, Gary, pitching staff wise, you got your 2 starters. You got Olsen and Comiska, and you've tried so many other guys for that Sunday start. Are you seeing good signs, bad signs, or is Nebraska just middling with the rest of their pitching staff, especially heading into a tournament situation?
I think the record is exactly who Nebraska is. Mm-hmm. They're 11-8 in the conference. They're 7 games over 500 against teams that they have more talent than 1 through 9. They're going to beat, but when they play the Indianas and the Marylands and even the Iowas, I think they're going to struggle. It's amazing about the 2 guys that are going after a Triple Crown and putting up incredible numbers. Dan Johnson and Matt Hopper, in the heydays of Nebraska baseball, were Batman and Robin, and they set records. And because they were on great teams, they're talked about to this day. I wonder if Bryce Matthews and Max Anderson and the incredible numbers they're putting up, and both of these guys are going to go probably in the 2nd to 3rd round of the Major League Baseball draft in July.
And Bryce will be an outfielder too, by the way, right? Like,
they
next level.
They're going to let him play shortstop.
Yeah.
Now, Max will be a second baseman. He has proven that he can field it. I mean, Max Anderson hadn't made an error. But these guys, like 10 years from now, are we going to talk about them? Because they could be on a team that didn't go to the NCAA tournament. It's kind of a weird balance because those 2 are putting up things we haven't seen before. But the rest of the roster, I think, is kind of hit or miss. You don't know what you're going to get. And I don't know if Nebraska can grab some consistency in the last 2 weeks. But you could make a case they're going to go 2 in the queue when they get to Omaha, or you could say, man, I could see them getting to Saturday, but man, I don't know if they're going to get to Sunday. It's just a perplexing team, and I think you hear that in the voice every time Will Bolt talks after a loss, because wasn't Tuesday in Omaha against Creighton kind of that's Nebraska baseball. They have an unacceptable loss in the resumption of the suspended game, and then they find a way to win in the nightcap, and you're like, okay, that's 2023 Nebraska baseball.
Well, Gary, to get you out here, and I know Schmidt's got to run, what lessons can be learned from this season by Will Bolt and his staff? What lessons do you take away from this year, assuming that there's not some sort of magical run at the end of it all?
I think they should look internally. I think they probably have to realize, okay, we have reset our roster after last year. We reset it this year. We're going to do a major reset next year because we're going to lose Matthews and Anderson and a couple other key guys. Do we need to look at what we're doing as a staff? Are we getting the best out of guys? Are we designing a roster that can overcome a couple of injuries to a Fromm or a Hood on the mound? Can we do that? Are we good enough as coaches to do that? If not, what is the answer? And I think that will be the first real test in the offseason for Will is, okay, you get your get out of jail card free with your roster. You might have to use that get out of jail free card to make a couple of decisions on your staff, or just one decision, because they have to figure out pitching, guys. Pitching just hasn't been consistent, and the development has not been across the board. Certain guys have definitely developed, but not enough of them to be able to say, we're going to go to Omaha, and the only thing we're worried about in Omaha is what seed we're going to be in the NCAA tournament.
Sharpie, great stuff, brother. Appreciate you. Have a good weekend, and we'll do it again next time. Thanks for the
guys. I appreciate it. Elijah and Schmidt, great shows this week. Really enjoyed listening.
Thank you.
Appreciate you, man. Thanks so much.
What about my show that I didn't have? God.
Kraynak, have a good baseball weekend. All right, brother?
Yeah, you as well, sir. All right, fellas.
Elijah, appreciate you. Back at you on Monday, 4:00 with Hail Varsity. Take care.